What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have quite a few things we're going to be talking to you about today, starting with what's going on in the main development region. We're seeing some developments over there. We're also watching an area of interest off the east coast of the United States and Tropical Storm Dexter that has strengthened in its transition to becoming post-tropical as it progresses through the subtropics over there. So we're going to want to pay attention to all of this, as well as another big area of potential development that could impact a few areas in the Lesser Antilles, the Greater Antilles, and potentially all the way up to the East Coast if the models hold that far. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it right now. So starting off, we have our two areas of interest over here, and we have Tropical Storm Dexter. Dexter is becoming more and more extratropical. It's currently a 50-mile-per-hour storm, minimum central pressure of 999 millibars. Its current location is 39.9 degrees north and 58.2 degrees west, moving at 15 miles per hour. I don't really need to go into the discussion or take a deep analysis like I did the last couple of times. It's mainly going to be affecting shipping areas and all of that. So if you're watching, like if you're one of those companies that does shipping and all of that stuff, you're going to want to watch that. But overall, this does not pose a threat to land. I'm not going to talk too much about Dexter other than kind of what I'm doing right now. But the main stuff I wanted to get to is these two areas of interest right here, particularly the one in the main development region, and then the potential one after that, whereas another wave is coming off the coast of Africa in the next day or two that we're going to want to pay attention to. That's the main meat of today's video. The first area of interest that's currently off the East Coast, it's been showing signs that it's not really going to be as strong or really have as big of a shot to develop as it did. Its kind of trajectory has changed quite a bit as well. Instead of maybe heading towards the Carolinas, it's now going to be moving off the East Coast. So that's the big development we have. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and read the advisory right here. A weak area of low pressure located several hundred miles off the coast of the southeastern United States continues to produce only limited shower and thunderstorm activity. This system is forecast to drift northward over the next day or two before turning northeastward. Environmental conditions now only appear marginally favorable for tropical development into early next week as the system moves northeastward, remaining offshore the eastern United States, 0% in the next 48 hours, 30% in the next 7 days. So basically before, what was potentially going to be happening is this area of interest was expected to kind of stay in that one area and then slowly start to move northwestward towards the Carolinas. Now the track has shifted completely. I'm not 100% sure if it's due to Dexter over here, kind of getting closer to the low pressure system, kind of trying to get absorbed into that. But we'll have to see how that pans out. But at this current point, if you're on the East Coast, the main concern I have is like rip currents and all that stuff. I would still advise against swimming and all of that stuff if it gets relatively large and strong and all of that stuff, so you're going to want to watch that. But ultimately, this doesn't pose as big of a threat as it did before. But the main stuff that we're going to want to watch is what's going on in the main development region right now, and we'll go ahead and read you that advisory. Shower and thunderstorm activity has become a bit more concentrated with a tropical wave in the eastern tropical Atlantic. Environmental conditions are forecasted to become conducive for gradual development during the next few days, and a tropical depression could form late this week over the weekend. As the system moves generally west-northwestward to northwestward across the central tropical and subtropical Atlantic. 30% chance of formation in the next 48 hours, 60% in the next 7 days. When we talked about it yesterday, it was at 0.50, 0% in 48 hours, 50% in 7 days. Now it's up to 30-60. So the NHC has really been not letting off the gas on this, and has really been paying attention to this wave out here that we're going to want to watch as well. And we're going to go ahead now and look at satellite imagery and take a look at it a little bit further. So looking at satellite and shifting over to the central Atlantic at this current point, looking at this tropical wave, as you can see right now, it's currently in the process of detaching from the intertropical convergence zone, or ITCZ, which is all of this convection, all of these clouds right here, and it's starting to move more to the west-northwest or northwest as it starts to detach. And you're also noticing it's starting to develop more of its own convection as well, and starting to develop a slight outflow boundary. At least it's in the process of beginning to do that. So this system's already becoming more organized. I was looking at it this morning. It's already more considerably more organized than, quite frankly, I was anticipating at this current point. I was originally expecting, and so was the tropical team at Storms United, for the system to remain relatively weak until it got to about the Lesser Antilles and then starting to develop. But given the increased organization and increased convection, that actually changes the track a little bit as well. We've also seen models pick up on this as well, because before we were seeing a split in the models in regards to the European wanting this to go out to sea and the GFS still wanting to take this to land. Now it seems that the models are actually in agreement, and this wave right here is expected to remain out to sea at this current point. However, it is expected to become somewhat powerful and somewhat strong according to some of the models. And I've talked to my tropical team about this. This wave you're seeing right here could actually be our first hurricane contender of the 2025 hurricane season. So you're going to want to pay attention to that as it evolves, as it develops, as it gets more organized as well. So we'll keep our eye on that, and we'll talk more about that as well as modeling in a second. But ultimately, we have some more updates that we need to discuss with you as well, and we'll go ahead and start with the Climate Prediction Center. So kind of teasing off of what we had at the end of yesterday's video, this is the latest CPC that came out as I was done filming and as I had to kind of go back and do this. Basically, what we have for you right here for week 2, this is August 13th to August 19th, you have a greater than 40% probability of tropical development in that western part of the main development region. That is a pretty considerable increase compared to what we saw previously, where it was a more broad area of a greater than 20% happening. And then you have the 20% happening right after that. So that's a pretty big uptick right there. And even the Climate Prediction Center that tells you is paying very close attention to this, and you're going to want to watch this. In terms of what's happening in week 3 from August 20th to the 26th, that's going to late August period right there. Broad area of MDR development as well. You're going to want to pay attention to that moving forward. But ultimately, the Climate Prediction Center is looking at this and going, yeah, we're looking at a more active pattern at this current point. You're going to want to take this seriously, and you're going to want to pay attention to that. So that's kind of your situation that we have with the Climate Prediction Center. I also want to go ahead and go over some conditions as well, because I really need to show you guys this, because this is kind of the time where we can't fool around anymore. So with that being said, let's go ahead and show you some water temps, OHC, shear, and all the other areas. So starting off right here, we have your water temperatures. They finally updated it for you on that map. Man, this is pretty concerning to say the very least. What you're looking at right here, first of all, let's zero into the big purple areas in the Gulf and off the coast of Cuba. That is 32 degrees Celsius. That is almost 90 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the United States. And the water temperatures out in the Atlantic Basin and the Caribbean, they've pretty much merged together, like the 29 degrees Celsius waters that kind of started off over here in the subtropics and northern part of the tropical region. They just sunk further and further and further to the south, and then they started to merge together. Now we have a massive area of 29 plus degrees Celsius waters over here that you're going to want to have to pay attention to as well. This is something you need to take very seriously, especially with that other wave that we're going to be talking about in a couple of minutes that's coming off the coast of Africa, because based on all the model guidance we have, it's going to be moving into this massive area of water temperatures. And it's not just the water temperatures I'm concerned about. It's also the ocean heat content. The OHC in all of these regions is very concerning, and it's very telling of what the conditions are out there. And considering the collapsing wind shear and the more moisture in the atmosphere, this is going to be a huge problem going forward. And in terms of OHC, let's start with what's going on in the Atlantic Basin. What you have right now is you have an area of 75 plus OHC and across a lot of the tropical regions of the basin, and parts of the subtropics, you're at 50 OHC. That is very concerning. And along the Gulf Stream, you're looking at up to 100 as well. Now, granted, we're going to want to see how this will ultimately pan out, but by and large, this is a lot of OHC to deal with, even at this current time of the year, especially with how far north it is. In regards to what's going to be happening with the wave, well, the current tropical wave is situated over here in this pocket of relatively low OHC, but that is expected to increase and is expected to be moving into more favorable water temperatures and more favorable ocean heat content values in itself. That's going to help increase more convection, allow for more organization, and all of that stuff as it starts to organize and develop. But it's going to be moving into better conditions because it's already organizing, and we're not even seeing 25 OHC where it's at right now. That is pretty concerning to me, to say the very least, and that just tells you, okay, this is your warning sign. The tropics are about to get active. You're going to want to take this very seriously. So that's what we have for your water temperatures and the OHC. Let's go ahead and move over to the conditions. So going ahead and showing you the European, we're going to go ahead and use the 0Z just to show you the conditions very quickly. Let's go ahead and start with the wind shear and kind of give you a general idea of what's going on. So looking at this right here, your wind shear map, pretty interesting to say the very least. I can understand why the NHC kind of downgraded that area of interest over here off the East Coast, because it's going to be moving into an area of unfavorable conditions. Before, it was expected to kind of stall and stay in the southwestern Atlantic and then move towards the Carolinas. Now it's expected to move northeast into a large amount of shear, and shear is expected to tear that system apart. So that's kind of why I think they've downgraded their risk over there, because the trajectory is shifted. Dexter is a bit stronger than we thought, and it's moving towards that area over there. So that's kind of why that's happening. You're moving into larger areas of wind shear. So that's the first thing we need to talk about. But going on and talking about what's going on in the MDR, look at what happens in the next 48 hours. Look, the wind shear across the parts of the MDR, across the Caribbean, the Atlantic Basin, and even in the Gulf completely falls apart. That is the telltale sign that we are open for business. And this is early August, folks, and we're talking about this. You're going to want to take this very seriously. And then as time continues to go on, you still see those very good conditions. And those conditions don't last for like 48 hours or like even 3 days. They last for a lot longer than that. And that is something you're going to want to take very seriously, especially very long term, with both the current tropical wave that's in the main development region and the next one that's going to be moving in there. Where the first one is, and it's expected to be moving, isn't going to be in an area of relatively low wind shear, as well as some decent moisture as well. And this is the reason why I've said, and so have my tropical team, have kind of looked at this and we're going, this actually could be our first hurricane contender of 2025. And that's kind of the biggest reason for that, because what you have with this kind of setup right here is you have plenty of warm water, you're going to be moving into better OHC values, you have plenty of low wind shear, and you have decent moisture to kind of support more convection going up. If we looked on satellite, yes, there is some dry air to the north of it, but it's actually getting mixed out more and more, in part due to the wave organizing and starting to produce a little bit of outflow, and in part because the moisture after that. There's been a bit of a moisture surge into parts of the MDR that I've kind of talked about in yesterday's video. So that's what we have going on across much of the tropics. And as you go more into the long term going forward, look at this. And this is very important for what's happening in the next little while in the MDR. Across the Caribbean, there's not very much wind shear that could stop this system. And the wind shear that's currently there moves out of the region. There is some quote-unquote shear over parts of this low pressure system right here. That's not shear. That's actually part of the system. That's winds generated from the storm right there. So I do want to make that clear, just to kind of clear up any discrepancies with that. So that's kind of your environment right here. It's a very favorable environment, with the exception of some stability issues, which we've talked about quite a bit. And I do think those stability issues are going to kind of subside for a bit and allow for this tropical development to take place. So with that being said, Let's go ahead now and show you the moisture component to all of this. Here's the 700 to 300 millibar relative humidity that we can pull up. Yes, there is some dry air to the north, but as we've said, it's getting mixed out at this current point in time, and you have a pretty big moisture pocket that's going to be moving in part because of this area of interest right here starting to organize and potentially develop in that region. That's going to keep the dry air out for the most part, and then the other area of interest right here, it's going to be starting out in a pretty big moisture pocket, and yes, there is going to be some dry air that tries to surround it, but ultimately, at least according to these runs, it looks like the models mix out a lot of this dry air, in part because of the outflow and in part because there's more convection being fired up right here. And then as we get towards the Caribbean, the environment becomes a lot more moist, and it's a lot more of a protective bubble compared to maybe some dry air we have in the Caribbean right here. And as you can see, it becomes a lot more moist over here, becomes a lot less dry. So you're going to want to keep tabs on that. You're going to want to pay attention to that, because if you do see dry air and it's getting mixed out like that, that's very telling to me. And that's going, okay, the system's not really messing around anymore. We're going to want to keep very close eyes on this. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to as well. But now we're going to go ahead and go into some model runs, because we need to absolutely talk about this. We're going to start with the European, then go to the European AI, and then the GFS, and a bunch of others, because I've looked at the 12Z runs that have come out so far, and in terms of the second wave, they have really upticked in terms of the potential development with that. So we'll go ahead and talk about that. So here's what we have with the Europeans, starting off with that. So the first wave comes off in the MDR, detaches from the ITCZ. The Europeans operational doesn't really give it that much of a shot of development until it moves towards the subtropical region of the Atlantic, although I do, in my opinion, think that this model, which was run at 0Z, is kind of behind what's going on right now in regards to the first wave. I do think the first wave is organizing a little quicker than the models we're anticipating at this current point, so I do want to make that clear. There is some bias in that regard right there, and it ultimately doesn't develop until it gets to the subtropics, and the European does want this system to make landfall in Newfoundland right here, which we'll have to pay attention to. That is about a week out. So if you're tuning in from Canada, you're going to want to pay attention to that as a potential area that this system could make landfall in, but it's still 180 hours out. Take it with a grain of salt. We'll keep you updated on it. But the second wave, as it's organizing and developing in the MDR, it's not going to organize right away. It's going to take its time and wait until it gets closer to the Lesser Antilles right here for it to start to get its act together. It doesn't reach tropical storm strength until it moves past Dominica right here, and then it shifts a bit further to the north. It stays south of Puerto Rico, actually is a Category 1 hurricane, and then it moves through Hispaniola. Its core gets completely disrupted, and it weakens back down to tropical storm strength, but because the environment over there is so good, it's not going to completely kill it off, and it's going to have plenty of factors going for it. Even as it moves through Cuba as a potential strong tropical storm to weak hurricane, you're going to want to pay attention to that as well. Granted, by the time this happens, this is 10 plus days out, so please take it with a grain of salt. We'll keep you updated on that. And then with the AI model, because this is pretty interesting, we'll show you the 0Z and the 12Z, but we have to be kind of quick with this. The AI model has the first wave trying to get its act together, but it really hasn't been doing that. The operational runs have been kind of falling behind the ensembles and what's been going on with the conditions in the MDR, so please do keep that in mind. But then the second wave comes through, moves through the Atlantic Basin, really starts to strengthen, gets down to a 965 millibar, potentially Category 2 hurricane as it potentially heads to Florida. Granted, by the time this happens, this is 15 days out, so this is highly unlikely at this current point. Just take it with a grain of salt. Then with the 12Z run right here, things get even more interesting moving forward. And then with the AI run, with the second wave, having the system organizing and developing, it actually doesn't start blowing up until it gets to the Atlantic Basin near the Bahamas right here, just because of how good the conditions are over there for tropical development. So that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. Lastly, we'll pull up the GFS 12Z. just to kind of wrap this up in a little bow. Then we have to wrap this video up. But here's the 12Z GFS. It's having the system organizing and developing. The GFS 12Z is still having the system move further to the west compared to the European, but it stays out to sea, and it starts to organize and develop as it moves closer to the subtropics. But given the conditions that we have so far, that's where we're at. But the 12Z GFS also has this system over here developing early and all of that stuff, and kind of really intensifying to a hurricane before it even gets to land right here. I have plenty of issues with that already. I'll talk more about that tomorrow, but with that being said, we got to wrap it up. Have a nice day. Stay safe.